Well, I think we've got just about everybody here who's going to be here.
Yeah.
Are you all set to go, Nina?
Yes,
And
standing by.
okay, well, let's get rolling. I'd like to propose a toast to absent friends. It's COVID level 3 in Auckland, so all of my friends are absent. For instance, I'm sitting here in Westmere with just my wife and my dog, and I guess all of you are in similar situations. So lockdown is usually regarded as a major curse, but it has its benefits because through the week during COVID, the handful of people we meet in person are not really allowed to talk to us very much. I every morning take my dog for a walk, and usually I see about 2 or 3 other people, but I don't have a conversation with me because I'm scared of spreading germs or receiving them. So if we want to have a real decent conversation on a serious topic, doing it by Zoom is really one of the best ways we can do it. And that's why I look forward to these sessions. It's a bit of an upside down situation, but we can have a better discussion sometimes with our absent friends than we can with the ones who are there in person. So I'm looking forward to hearing your joys and concerns. I'm looking forward to sharing with you some of my ideas on the government's suggestion of hate speech, and I'm looking forward to your conversation on that. So you are my absent friends today, and I welcome you, and I welcome those who are visitors. I hope this will be a valuable time for you as well. I'd like to now hand over to Sally to lead us in our first hymn. Thank you, Sally. Well, I had some difficulty thinking of a suitable reading to go with a sermon that is about a hate speech and about freedom of speech. And I thought at first of getting some readings from the Jewish prophets who certainly believed in freedom of speech and did some very brave confrontations of the government instead. And then I thought, well, of course, one person's prophet is another person's idiot. And things that inspire some people may drive others to fury. So that started me looking a little wider at lessons to illustrate free speech. And this particular one that I've chosen is not from the Bible or any devotional work at all. It's from the New Zealand Herald yesterday. And I'll read it to you. As many as 2,000 anti-lockdown protesters this morning gathered on the fields and steps in front of the Auckland War Memorial Museum. The crowd included a range of people from gang members to grannies. There were families, including some with young babies, on picnic chairs. Others included people in wheelchairs and some walking dogs, while a series of motorbikes were parked to the side. Brian Tamaki took the stage about 11:20 and thanked those who had gathered. He thanked the New Zealand police for working with him to make it a peaceful but powerful day. The protesters who showed up today, he said, are bringing an important message that we are taking back our country. Today we are facing a government we thought we could trust. Instead, they are stripping away the freedoms and rights of everyday Kiwis. He said he believed the government didn't know what to do next and had run out of ideas. He said he was not a scientist or politician. Some of those gathered probably were experts by now because of everything they had read on social media. But he said Auckland was coming up to spending 50 days in home detention. That's what they give to prisoners. We've all gone to prison. Society has been restructured in fear. Earlier this week, Auckland Mayor Phil Goff slammed Tamaki as an idiot after revealing he was planning to do this protest. Goff said he wished there was some element of common sense from Tamaki. Our police have got so many things they need to do fighting crime. They don't need to be wasting time dealing with idiots. Other speakers on stage called on protesters to keep socially distanced as much as possible. This is a peaceful stand, they said. All around the world, we have seen all sorts of stands, and some have been riots, but this is peaceful, one of the MMCs told those who had gathered. Police kept a low profile on the edges of the crowd. Security staff in high visibility vests were flanking the stage and moving along. Other users of the domain, dog walkers, cyclists and joggers all moved past the protesters. Rally protesters started to disperse after Tamaki had finished talking. Police earlier said they would be visible at the rally and warned that protesters could be arrested. A police spokeswoman said officers would monitor the event, reserving the right to arrest those or fine those who are breaking the COVID restrictions. We will be monitoring the situation and responding accordingly, they said. Police respect and recognise people's lawful right to protest. However, under level 3 restrictions, the only gatherings allowed are weddings, funerals and tangihanga with no more than 10 people. Police do have the ability to take enforcement action, including issuing infringement notices, summoning people to court, making arrests for those found breaching the restrictions in place. So here is what in other countries has been a really violent confrontation, but our police have took the side this time of respecting freedom of speech. I sometimes wonder that it's a great illustration of my theme. Did the police make a mistake? Should they have been arresting these people? Will they perhaps be arresting some later? But anyway, I offer you that as a thought. And now, if we could switch now to the chalice lighting, thanks, Nina.
This chalice is our focus point. It marks our shared inspiration and the hopes and joys that we bring to each other. It's better to light a candle than to curse the darkness. Better to let its bright light show where you stand, for its warmth will melt the dark night like the coming of a new dawn, and hope will be spread by that small flame in your hand.
My address to you today is on the subject. I think that the government's hate speech proposal has gone a bit too far. In July, I got into this subject. I got a call from a member of the Association of Rationists and Humanists saying, have you written a submission on the government's hate speech proposal? Well, I hadn't, but I was grateful for the suggestion. I had written a similar article a couple of years ago, taking a free speech approach, and I found that my thoughts had shifted in between. I do support the basic idea of protecting New Zealand minority groups against hate speech, but I'm even more still on the side of free speech. And I support the government's concern, which started this inquiry, the Christchurch mosque shootings 2.5 years ago. We would all like to see some assurance that this must not happen again. But I question whether this proposal is the best way to do it. I'd like to start with the fine detail. The government sent out a discussion paper on it, which had 6 suggestions. And I want to start with those suggestions. The first one is the main change that the government wants to make is to change the order of the 4 main principles of what is now Section 131 of the Human Rights Act. That's an act about inciting people to violence. Now, the present law, which is in the Human Rights Act, does not mention hatred at all. What it says is a person commits an offence if they publish material which is threatening, abusive, or insulting. So it's focusing on the actions, abuse, insulting, threatening people. But it mentions hatred in the second clause. It says these things become an offence if they are done with the intention of inciting hostility, ill will, or contempt. Now, in the new proposal, that clause about hatred gets moved up to the top of the list instead of being seconded down, and it says it would be a crime to intentionally stir up, incite, maintain, or normalize hatred. The discussion paper says this is an improvement because threats, abuse, and insults are a complicated list of issues, and it'd be simpler and clearer just to refer to hatred. But I have a big problem with this because I believe hatred should not be a crime at all. I know lots of people who hate Muslims, unfortunately, but whenever this question comes up, they would always are keen to assure me they would not support violence like we saw in Christchurch. So to put the emphasis on hatred, I think, is a mistake. It misses the mark. Professor Paul Morris raised this question in a public forum a couple of months ago. He said it's well established that hatred leads on to violence, but I think that is simply false. In my lifetime, I've seen hundreds of instances of hatred. I've only seen about 2 or 3 where that hatred led on to violence. And I believe the principle of civil liberty means that we should not be muzzling people who have hatred in case it leads on to violence. We should be waiting until it does some actual harm. I believe the police should only intervene when it actually does lead to violence, or where there is a strong chance of it leading to violence. And the present law makes that very point. Right down the bottom of its list of 4 principles, it says a publication becomes an offence if the words or written matter are likely to excite hostility or ill will against groups of New Zealanders on the grounds of colour, race, and so on. Now, that's the issue, I think, which should be at the top of the list. Are there good grounds for thinking those hateful words are going to lead to widespread harm? It's those results, I believe, that the law should be focusing on. And in fact, that particular clause is missing from the new proposal altogether. It's got about hatred. It has not got about anything about the results of hatred. Now, I support some of the words of the new proposal. It says it should not just cover stirring up trouble, but it should also speak of maintaining hatred. That bit I agree with, but I still think it should be focused on the actions. In some cases, murder and hatred of murder, hatred is not part of it at all. I have a copy of a psychological manual at home, and I looked up what were the psychological conditions which can cause someone to kill others. I found that narcissists who are full of their own self-importance may often be driven to kill because of jealous rage. But other people who are driven to murder may be driven by other motives altogether. Some are driven by a boast about their skill and their ability to put other people down. I would say James Bond is a model for that. He was licensed to kill, but was James Bond driven by hatred? I think not. He was driven more by being a show-off, by wanting to show his skill, use fancy new toys, and he may be inciting people to think they have a license to kill, but is he really inciting them to drive dangerously? Is he inciting people to jump from one rooftop to another? Is he doing this so that he can impress attractive women, which he seems to end all of his stories doing? From the crime point of view, it doesn't matter, I would say, what their motives were. We want to stop all these mass killers, whatever their motivation. And we want to stop all the dangerous drivers as well, the people who do these things. In point of fact, the court that sentenced the Christchurch killer got reports on his psychology, and they said he did not have any particular personality disorder. He was within the normal range. So any hatred he had was not out of the normal. Hatred was not a mark of what those psychologists found. My third point was this new law really necessary at all? It was brought in because of the Christchurch killing, but the killer was quite satisfactorily dealt with under the present law. It was not the human rights law at all. It was the law against terrorism, and he was found guilty of a charge of terrorism. He was also found guilty on 51 counts of murder, and I think it was about a dozen counts of attempted murder. And it was for these 3 crimes that he was sentenced to life imprisonment without parole. So although the judge actually did use the words hate crime, it was not hatred that was part of the evidence. would the proposed change in the law have made any difference? Well, it might have made a small difference. The law, one of the features of the crime was that he wore a head camera. It took a live stream of his killing, and that really caused a lot of concern by the Prime Minister and many others. But would it have changed that? Would it have changed that sentencing of Tarrant if they'd had a law that said you shouldn't publicise violent acts? It might have, but it was not really necessary. It was superfluous. And I would say that in many cases, the principle of stopping a violent act is that we would all endorse. The actual publicising of it is, in some cases, only a minor aspect of it. One of the aspects I would like to comment on is that the the new law increases the penalties. I don't feel competent to comment on all the penalties. They include raising the penalty for this from 3 months to 3 years. It would have to be a very serious crime to deserve that penalty, but the law recognises that. But my first point is that, to me, one of the major issues is that these are all the negative actions we can take. And I say they're negative. The negatives are important. Punishment is an essential part of our response. But I would say it's not the whole part, not the whole answer. It's not realistic to think that we can outthink and stop in advance every person who may be capable of a massive hate crime. Should we try to monitor every gun club to find a handful of people who may misuse their guns? Should we monitor every minority group to find the people there who may go violent? This was a thing which annoyed a Muslim friend of mine who walked out of one of the government's forums on dealing with hatred. And the reason he pulled out, because they were focusing on security, and the Muslims themselves were being investigated as potential terrorists. This absolutely horrified this man, and he wanted to look at other directions altogether. And one of those, the advantage, I'd say, of positive measures to increase goodwill is they can work even if we don't know who are the future terrorists. One such positive measure is a cause that I've been working on, as you know, that all religions should be taught in state schools. I believe that would make a small contribution to goodwill, and that it would be better to work for goodwill towards people of different religions than to look for more penalties. But in closing, I'd like to say that the government itself has been doing this. I'm saying this as though the government was doing nothing about increasing goodwill. In fact, the Prime Minister has been hugely active in showing compassion for Muslims, in calling together meetings where there's been huge public support. One of the best bits of publicity, I think, for goodwill is just the huge number of scenes we saw of thousands and thousands of flowers being left outside mosques. I went to one of the mosque meetings in Auckland, and the whole front of the mosque property was absolutely covered with flowers. Now, to my mind, this is the good publicity, and I suspect in the long run it is much more effective, possibly even more effective than educating people about Islam. People don't need to know the details of Islam to want to offer flowers, to see Muslim people in tears and coping with strength. So the good word is getting out. We don't really, in my submission, need to be that bothered with the publicity that Brendan Tarrant got briefly by having a head camera. I don't think that camera was really the heart of the problem, and I don't think getting rid of that kind of publicity will be a big part of the answer. So those are my thoughts on the subject, and that's I offer that as a discussion starter. And I suggest that you could look at the whole issue. I'd suggest the one way of focusing it would be to say, do you think our present political parties are going too far on the side of censorship? Do you think they're going too far on the side of free speech, or do you think they've got it about right? So I offer those thoughts to you, and we'll switch over shortly to that. I was trying to find my. If you could guide me, Nina, what's our next? I think it's the.
Next, we hand over to Sally for another hymn.
Okay, thanks, Steve. Thank you very much, Sally.
The hymn is "I'm on my way to the Freedom Land," and over to you, Sally. Let's see if this works.
Thanks, David, for showing us a new hymn. I don't think we've sung this one in church, but it's in our hymnal 116.
Thank you, Sally. All right, David, shall we extinguish the chalice?
We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.
David, shall I play your postlude music?
Thanks very much, yes. Thank you. And now for my closing words. May love inspire you, wisdom guide you, and peace surround you until we meet again.
Thanks, David. All right, so now it's time for our discussion. David, I wonder if you might repeat the discussion question so it's fresh in everyone's mind.
I haven't got them in front of me, but it's looking at the present political parties. Do you think they put too much emphasis on freedom of speech or too little emphasis on it, or do you think they've got it about right?